for folks that can't join us. So thanks for that. So on to our featured guest. Phyllis Zagano, PhD, is a senior research associate in residence and an adjunct professor of religion at Hofstra University in Hempstead, New York. Dr. Zagano is an internationally recognized authority on the history and theology of the women's diaconate. And no less than Pope Francis has recognized this as he appointed her to the Papal Commission for the Study of Women in the Diaconate in 2016, which we hope to hear a little bit about tonight. Dr. Zagano is the author or editor of 25 books in religious studies, most recently Just Church, Catholic Social Teachings, Synodality, and Women, which is available now from Paulist Press, and we will provide a link for that to people who are here tonight. She's also recently published an article called A Survey of Vatican Studies on the Diaconate of Women in the journal Theological Studies, where she writes, "The modern debate about women in the diaconate has not ended." So good words to remember as we go into the Synod. In addition to her academic publication, she writes an award-winning nationally syndicated column that appears regularly in the National Catholic Reporter. And we've been privileged to publish her work at TAC throughout the years. She's held multiple visiting professorships and fellowships and is the founding co-chair of the Roman Catholic Studies Group of the American Academy of Religion. And just last week, she presented the Rita Casella-Jones Lecture on Women in U.S. Catholicism at Fordham University, which was titled Management, Not Ministry, The Future of Women in the Catholic Church. We're thrilled that she could take some time out of her busy schedule to be with us this evening. So Dr. Zagano, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good, good. So we'll get to some of the current and pressing questions about the status of the diaconate in the Synod in a moment, but I'd like to perhaps begin with a brief overview of the modern history of the diaconate, just to bring us up to speed. We know that the Second Vatican Council restored the office of the diaconate as a permanent level of holy orders. We know that Pope Paul VI created new lay ministries, lector, alkalite, and he revised the holy orders of deacon, priest, and bishop. A lot of kind of technical theological speak there, but maybe you could walk us through how the diaconate was understood before Vatican II and some of the movement around that time to restore the diaconate and how that all happened.
Well, it depends on how far before you want to go in terms of the Second Vatican Council. Someone doesn't have audio, so sorry. But at the time of the Second Vatican Council, now it was being planned and being ramped up actually as the Second World War had closed and Europe was rebuilding. But during the Second World War, there were groups, deacon circles that formed in Germany and spread began to spread throughout Europe. And it was they who brought the suggestion to the Second Vatican Council that the diaconate as a permanent vocation for men, particularly married men, be restored. And to better understand that in the trajectory of history, I can tell you that the same proposal came before the Council of Trent, and it was not accepted. However, also at the Council of Trent, it was determined that the diaconal ordination was clearly sacramental. And that became a bit of a roadblock as the fathers of the Second Vatican Council considered the ordination of men to the diaconate as a permanent vocation, because the question was, can women also be ordained to the vocation of the diaconate as a permanent vocation. So that was discussed. Actually, women were discussed more in the coffee bars than on the floor of the council. There were two bishops who brought up, made interventions asking about women as deacons. One was from South America, the other one was from Italy. And one wanted social service women deacons, the other wanted monastic women deacons. Anyway, that went no place, but the diaconate as a permanent vocation was accepted and moved and grew very, very quickly. We have over 50,000 deacons ordained to the diaconate as a permanent vocation right now in the world. And they are, for the most part, married. For the most part, they are living the diaconate as a part-time vocation, but they are all over the world and they are doing good work.
Excellent, excellent. Maybe we could go now. We started kind of pre-Vatican II. If we could go all the way back, and we could just set the stage. I know many of us are familiar, especially recent years, with the great work of Discerning Deacons, the organization about Saint Phoebe. We've learned a lot about her and the appointment of the first deacons in Acts 6. And I'm wondering if you could just give us a little background on some of the specific ministries of the deacon in the early church, why they're still needed today. And just to comment maybe about, you write in your book, the diaconate actually preceded the development of the priesthood. And throughout the first millennia of the church, it grew and expanded to become an extremely powerful clerical caste. I was very surprised to learn that of the 37 men elected pope between 432 and 684, only 3 were known to have been ordained a priest before their election to the papacy. So what was it like in the early church? And maybe we'll leave it there. And I have a follow-up on that, but just...
Well, we don't know exactly what it was like every place all over the early church. We do know that the only person in Scripture who bears the job title, if you will, of deacon is Phoebe, Saint Phoebe, whose feast is the 3rd of September. And she was charged by St. Paul to bring his letter to the Romans. And one can assume that she also was charged with explaining the letter to this nation community of Christians in Rome. Basically, the people, the men named in, and it's assumed that they're males, the seven names, that's the perfect number, but the people named in Acts are not called deacons. They are. The apostles said, well, we can't do everything, and so we need worthy people to basically manage the funds and the charity of the church. And that is considered to be one of the beginnings of the diaconate. But we don't know, of course, what was happening all over because we don't have complete records, and we never will have complete records. However, the diaconate was quite active, really, for the first couple of centuries in the church. And eventually, the apostles, who were episcopes, overseers, bishops, eventually they realized they needed much more help than just the deacons, and so they appointed presbyters who would be in charge of communities, hither and yon. So as the threefold ministry of orders developed, women were included, and we have several ordination ceremonies for women, and men to the diaconate, and those liturgies were copied and used really through the 12th century. We have a lot of manuscripts. There are 5 in the Vatican Library. I forget whether it's two Eastern and 3 Western or vice versa, but those manuscripts, and I'm doing a study on this now, those manuscripts present the formulations for sacramental ordination. There was a man named Jean Morin who in the 17th century did a study just of the ordination ceremonies known to be used for women, and he said that they met the criteria for sacramental ordination according to the Council of Trent. And as I said earlier, Trent was discussing the diaconate at the time. But if you remember what sacrament, in terms of the sacrament of order, what that's about, there is the question of matter and form. Okay, so here's Theology 101. The matter of the sacrament of order is the laying on of hands. Okay, now before Vatican II, it was one hand, one bishop. Okay, and that's still used in the Eastern Catholic churches and in the Orthodox churches. One hand, one bishop. One hand, one bishop. However, the determinations of Pius the 12th in 1947 about the form and matter of the sacrament of order, particularly ordination to diaconate and priesthood, it's okay not to touch the person. You can have a moral touching. And that's very important, because some of the people who argue against the historical ordination of women to the diaconate say, oh, well, they weren't really ordained because the bishop only put his hands over the woman. He didn't touch her. And the two Greek terms, one is now interpreted as blessing and ordination, but really they both mean ordination. It just means one, you touch the head, and the other one you don't. But as I said, Pius XII in 1947 said it doesn't matter whether you touch the person or not. It's the moral intent to do what you do. So that's matter. And then there's form. And the big word in form is a Greek word called epiklesis, or epiklesis if you know how to pronounce Greek, which I don't. But epiklesis means the calling down of the Holy Spirit. It's the prayer of ordination. And so these are the two points in determining whether a liturgy is intended to be a sacramental or a sacrament. And we're finding as we go through them, just went through the liturgy used by Egbert of York in the 8th century. It includes the laying on of hands. It also includes very interesting thing. The female candidate prostrates herself before the altar, and the female candidate receives a stole from the bishop. So these are extraneous. The two major things, matter and form, the laying on of hands and the epiklesis, the calling down of the Holy Spirit. And so we have historical evidence that women were sacramentally ordained. To say that the bishop used these ceremonies and did not intend to sacramentally ordain someone is a terrible comment on the intent of the bishop. I mean, it's you can't say he's faking it. And the only other argument is that the Holy Spirit cannot effect a sacrament on a female. Well, the canon law says that any Christian, any Catholic, baptized Catholic, can receive any sacrament unless impeded by natural or ecclesiastical law. Well, natural law means that somehow you're not fully formed. That's an impediment. So a one-armed man cannot be ordained as a priest, but that's a natural impediment that can be waived. You can get what's called a derogation from the law at that case. The ecclesiastical impediment, of course, right now is that the ordinand would be female. So there's really nothing against restoring the diaconate to women at all, as far as I can see.
There was a line in your theological studies article that I liked about that as a response to the iconic argument about women not imaging Christ, where you say that bespeaks a naive physicalism, which I hadn't heard that word before, but I think that's an apt way to respond. Maybe, Phyllis, if you could kind of to stay with the history for a bit, just what happened in the 12th century that caused this rupture in the diaconate that needed to have it be restored in the 20th? If we know that we were ordaining women in I believe it was Lucca in Italy, or they were still functioning as abbesses, and then somehow it kind of drops off. What happened in that middle period?
Well, in Lucca, actually, he was ordaining, his name was Ottoni, and he apparently didn't get the memo. So he was still ordaining social service women, social service deacons who would work outside the monasteries. During the Middle Ages, for the most part, the women who were ordained as deacons were abbesses, and then they would ordain other women as deacons in the abbeys to serve for the liturgy and to provide for the needs of the sisters. But from the problem was not so much with women deacons, the problem was with men deacons. And the problem with men deacons, really throughout Europe, but mostly in Rome, was that, when the Pope died, when the bishop died, you needed to find another bishop. And for the most part, the archdeacon would be the one who was running the diocese, running the Diocese of Rome. And so we have some 37 men, as you said earlier, who were elected to the See of Peter without having been ordained as priests. And that's an important point, because you can well understand, I think, I mean, I do, if you have an archdeacon who's basically running the diocese, and you need another bishop, I think it makes perfect sense to go to the archdeacon to make him the bishop. Now the priest didn't like this, and so the law came about. And between the 10th and the 12th centuries, it was codified, and you have Gresham Gresham's codification of law that says no one will be ordained a deacon unless he, and only he, is going on the way to priesthood. So now you have a situation where no one can be ordained a deacon unless he is on the way to priesthood. Well, we don't have women on the way to priesthood, and we don't have Kate McElree in the background with the Women's Ordination Conference. So you end up with the diaconate for women really fading. Although we have mentioned really until the 14th century of women somewhere here, there, and everywhere in Europe called deacons. And of course, in the Orthodox churches and the Eastern churches, they're still they maintain the tradition, and they understand their tradition much better. They feel it's simply been abandoned.
Maybe that brings us to an interesting moment that happened recently, where I believe an Orthodox deaconess was ordained in Zimbabwe. What can the Catholic Church learn from that? It seems like the Orthodox kind of took the reins here. What's your response?
Right. I've read the liturgy. I haven't seen the video yet. Deaconess Angelique was ordained by Metropolitan Seraphim in Harare, outside of Harare, Zimbabwe, with the approval of his senior in Africa. There's also consideration that there will be more ordinations in Zimbabwe and also in Kenya. Angelique happens to be married. But I read her liturgy, and the liturgy they used is the contemporary liturgy for the ordination of a Greek Orthodox deacon, in which Metropolitan Seraphim just changed the pronouns. And so in the United States, particularly the Antiochian Orthodox, but in the United States, there's been a lot of falling on the floor, very upset about this. But it's and more about not that it's illicit or illegal, except insofar as that they weren't consulted. But the consultation did take place throughout Africa, and the consultation took place over a couple of years. So it was no surprise in Africa that this was going to happen. And I think that puts the Catholic Church into a bit of a bind now, because the Catholic Church can not really say that this was not a valid ordination. And if women in Orthodoxy can be ordained validly, then why not Catholic women?
Right. I think there's a line in one of your essays. The hierarchy, they can't say no, but don't want to say yes, seems to be how it's playing out now.
Well, I was told that 30 years ago by the highest placed woman in the Vatican. They can't say no. They simply don't want to say yes. And I cannot see, I could not write, I keep thinking about what the Pope said. I'm getting ahead of your schedule here, but I keep going over what he said. And he did not say that it wasn't possible. What he did say was it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction. Maybe we should just, kind of move the schedule a bit, since that is the pressing question on everybody's mind is we're heading into this synod. We did hear that comment from the Pope. Where does this leave us? What's the point of having the conversation now? Is there still an opening to, and I want to keep unpacking this throughout the evening, but just, where's the conversation now after he did make that remark, unfortunately?
Yeah, well, what's the point of having a synod? And what I'm hearing around the country is that people have put in their comments. There were, at the beginning, 112 of 114 Episcopal conferences around the world put in their comments from their prayerful discernment. There's their prayerful considerations of the needs of the church. The continental assemblies said the same thing. We need to do something about women. Majority of them said women deacons. We had the Amazon Synod, where 9 of 12 language groups asked specifically for the ordination of women as deacons. And so right now, the Pope's response to that question that Nora O'Donnell posed on CBS television, which was aired. It was very interesting. It was taped before the deaconess Angelique was ordained and aired after she was ordained. But anyway, his response really threw a wet rag on the entire synod process. And I'm hearing from around the country that people say they don't want to bother anymore because it's like, oh, sure, we'll listen, but you discern, we'll decide. And of course, that's in canon law. Canons 129 and 274 basically say that the clerics are the only ones who can take decisions.
Right, right. Maybe since we're speaking kind of about the synod, we could just get a sense of, I think we have a loose sense of how this issue's evolved since Vatican II, but could you kind of unpack for us the different commissions? I know there was the International Theological Commission, which came out of previous study groups, and they issued a statement in 2002. There was the two pontifical commissions, one of which you were a member of. Can you share a bit about, well, first kind of walk us through those different steps, but then maybe share a bit of your experience in 2016. And also the big question everybody's asking is, when will the Vatican publish the results of these commissions on the women diaconate, and why has the Vatican been silent up to now, which seems to be, just as you said, the opposite of synodal transparency?
Yeah, well, that's an important thing. I never saw what was handed to the Pope on my behalf. And none of us has. And that's the same with the second commission. The second commissioners did not receive the final copy of what the Holy Father received. I did see some of what he gave to the sisters, but I never saw the transmittal letter. And what he gave the sisters is not everything I wrote. So I don't know anything. Transparency to me not transparency and Vatican are two words that just don't go together, as far as I know. We talked about the Second Vatican Council. In 1973, obviously in the early 70s, the discussion about women in the church was to the fore because of the ordinations, basically in the United States, in Philadelphia, of the 13 Episcopalian women to the priesthood. And and also it was the UN year for women. So the Pope at the time, Paul VI, established a commission on the role of women in church and society. And there were a whole bunch of people. There were 14 women, but more men, and mostly clerics. And if you can believe it, I found one of them alive who told me what happened. And she said that something was going on. Well, this is from other research, but something was going on. And in the Vatican, the curial offices got together and made sure that they wouldn't be talking about priesthood. And at the first meeting, an Indian woman who was the president of an association of Indian women in India asked, well, what about the diaconate? And they were shut down because the president of the commission, a guy named Bartoletti, said, interestingly enough, from Lucca, said, no, that's only a step on the way to priesthood, which is wrong, but it was shut down. But that commission met, and not a lot happened, except for the fact that, and I haven't found these yet, but there were two documents given to Paul VI at Castel Gandolfo in the summer after the commission met in 1975. One of the documents was an official report of the commission. Another one was about the ordination of women, and it was kind to the ordination of women as deacons, because Paul VI was interested in restoring women to the ordained diaconate. And concurrently with the commission, there was the first iteration of the International Theological Commission, which reports to the then Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, now the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. That International Theological Commission had a special subcommission of 4 theologians specifically studying women in the diaconate. One of the men in that commission was Cipriano Vagaggini, who wrote a long article about Eastern women and said, yeah, they were ordained. And in 1987, he actually said to a synod of bishops, and he reiterated, he said, there's no reason not to ordain women. as deacons. That document, those documents were never published as official Vatican Commission ITC documents. Yves Congar on the Roman side, he said the same thing, and he published his article elsewhere. So we have publications, not official Vatican publications, but we have publications in the mid-1970s, Eastern and Western, saying, yeah, ordaining women as deacons is no big deal. Go ahead and do it. Not that did anything. Then the academic debate continued, and we go to the International Theological Commission in 1992, which met again and discussed women deacons. I mean, what happened, as you must know, is that the first International Theological Commission in 1976 said, forget about deacons, we're just going to say no to priests, which they did. But the official commentary said this does not apply to women deacons. That's further study. Well, you'll find that every single iteration of any kind of discussion about women in the church, when it comes to women deacons, they say, oh, well, we need further study. I've spent 45 years on this. They don't need further study, okay? Right. They're okay. We know, and they know, and they know that we know that they know that we know that they know. You know what I mean? So they're kind of, one would say, kicking the can down the road. Anyway, in 1997, the International Theological Commission wrote a document. It was 17 pages long. And I was told this in person and in writing by a member of this ITC iteration. Somebody's getting very upset. I can see on the thing, but anyway, women deacons are no big deal. You can ordain women as deacons. And the document was printed, it was numbered, it was voted on by the whole commission, but the prefect would not, the president of the commission, who was the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, would not promulgate it. His name was Joseph Ratzinger. So he said, well, we need more study. So they needed more study, and they went to another iteration of the International Theological Commission, and Ratzinger put one of his students, Portuguese professor, expert in the study of St. Augustine, on the commission, and Gerhard Mueller rewrote the section on women deacons. It now became 78 pages. And we did a computer analysis of the documents, and we found 18 sections or 18 sentences, either completely copied or paraphrased from Mueller's own book, but uncited in the Vatican document. So, you know how much work went into doing that. And I asked them, I said, did you all, a member of it, did you have Mueller's book available to you? And he said, yes. I said, why didn't you ask him to do footnotes? It's very obvious in studying it. And we studied it and we compared it in English and in German. And I worked with the German department in my university, who said, Mr. Mueller has to go see the dean, because it's clearly plagiarized. Self-plagiarism. Anyway, then we get to my commission. I was named in 2016, and we met 4 times, and we created a document. I think the Vatican police will arrest me if I talk about it. It's a papal secret, and I must respect that actually, without being too flippant about it, because we were discussing matters. The Pope came, he asked us questions, and we wrote a response. My problem is I don't know what he got, and none of us knows what he got. You can assume what my response was, but I don't know if it got to him. And then he had the Amazon Synod, where, as I said earlier, 9 of 12 language groups said we want women deacons, and he said I'll pick up the gauntlet. I've heard what you've said. I'm going to recall the commission, maybe add 3 people to it. And but that didn't happen. He named 10 new people, 5 men and 5 women. And their expertise, to my mind, was not such as my first commission. My first commission was extraordinary number of extraordinary theologians, ecclesiologists, women and men who were well published. And of course, not everybody agreed, but if you get two theologians in a room, you'll have 5 opinions anyway. So that's no news. But the Second Papal Commission did their work 2 weeks each. 1 week, I think, in September of 2021. The second week in July of 2022. It was all fouled up because of COVID, and they presented something. But again, they never saw what was presented to the Pope. They did have one of their members right after published, in some, shall we say, more conservative American newspapers, his personal opinion, which I can't support. I can't support as an academic. So now we're at the Synod on Synodality, which is where we began.
Right, right. And yeah, do you have any hopes for these? I know they've moved several issues off of the official Synod agenda. There's these 10 study groups. Study group number 5 to study these specific ministerial forms, which is kind of code for the women's diaconate. The names have not been released, and we're kind of, do you have hopes for this, that even out of the synodal process, maybe after 50 years of discernment, the study group will have kind of an aha moment, or the tenor will change somehow?
Well, the way there are 10 study groups answering questions levied by the Synod on Synodality in its final report. All of the study groups, their members are named except for Study Group 5. Study Group 5 is headed by Armando Mateo, who is the Secretary for Doctrine. There are 2 secretaries in the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and Mateo is the Secretary for Doctrine of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, in coordination, it says, with legislative text and with worship and sacraments. So he's in coordination with 2 other dicasteries that are very important. My intuition is that there may be a document coming from the Holy Father, because if the Holy Father were to be writing a document, he would have 1 or 2 people writing it. You wouldn't know, you'll never know who wrote it. And it would then go to the dicasteries to be massaged and to be coordinated. Literally, those are the words. You have to coordinate with legislative text. You have to coordinate with worship and sacraments, and you have to coordinate with doctrine. Now, what might they be doing? Well, there are 2 possibilities. One possibility would be that he would allow certain Episcopal conferences to restore the tradition of women ordained to the diaconate within their territories, given the ability of bishops, individual bishops, to do that or not. The other thing he could be doing would be inventing an installed female diaconate, just as he brought women into the installed lectorate and acolyte. He could be creating some kind of a 4th something, where women are not sacramentally ordained, they're only blessed. I have written that would be, in my considered theological opinion, a train wreck. And I think that it's not a good idea because he is then saying that women are not ordainable. Well, if women are not ordainable, then they're not baptizable, nor they are confirmable, nor are they anything else. Because any Christian, as I said earlier, can receive any sacrament unless impeded by natural or ecclesiastical law. And the law is easy to change. Canon 102.4 simply could be rewritten to say that a baptized male alone is sacramentally ordained as a priest or bishop, Bastacosi. So I'm not sure what's coming out, and I do know, and I have been told by members of the C9 and also other cardinals who are part of the synod, that he does not want the synod to be hijacked by women's ordination. And I say, well, of the 18 issues, the only one marked urgent is women. And if you're not going to restore women to the ordained diaconate, then you're not listening to the synod. It's as simple as that.
What do you make of the argument? I've heard this more anecdotally from people that Pope Francis is playing some kind of long game where he ultimately wants to declericalize the church and have put the emphasis on the lay ministries and kind of not on the ordained question. And he doesn't want, he wants a more, a church that's less dependent on holy orders and to people to go out to the peripheries in these lay ministries. What would you say to that as someone who's supports the women's diaconate?
Right. Well, the long game could mean many things, and that has been quoted to me. But I think, and I do agree, and I did write an article in an Irish journal called Studies, responding to his emphasis on Canon 517, paragraph 2, pastoral associates, to restore the work of the laity to run parishes. The numbers were extraordinary. There were only like 400 at the time of pastoral associates in the world, from what I could find. Now, that's important, and it's an important thing to do. However, if he wants to declericalize the church, he's got a long road ahead of him. The joke is, the pastor's dead when you can get the checkbook out of his hands. And I think that it doesn't need to be one or the other. I think it needs to be both and. And I think if you just get more women into not everybody wants to be a deacon. Not all women want to be deacons. A lot of women don't want to get involved with with the clerical system at all. They don't want to be under the control of the bishop. So there would be a significant number of women who are perfectly happy to be, although as a pastoral associate or a pastoral minister, you're still, you're working for them. But I don't buy that in terms of a long game to declericalize the church. I buy that as a long game, and that's the way it was explained to me, so that when he does it, it can't be undone. And I think he did start that with the changing canon law with the motu proprio, I think in 2021. Saying that women could be installed as lectors and acolytes. That's a big deal, because you can't be ordained a deacon unless you have been formally installed and ministered in the ministry of lector and acolyte. Not that he's had female acolytes in the Vatican, but,
Right, right. What do you make of the argument sometimes to argue against women's ordination to the diaconate, that this is some type of like exclusively Western issue? I hear that a lot, that it's like for the North American and European churches are primarily concerned with this, and this isn't as much of a concern in other areas. Does that bear anything out to you, or is that just...
Well, I don't know about the European churches. I don't think women in the European churches could care less. I think about the church at all. But certainly North America and South America, Central and South America. I years ago was a guest at the United Nations and spoke with women from every continent, mostly women religious, on this point. And to a woman, they said that it would be helpful for their ministry. They weren't interested in being priests, but to be able to be ordained, particularly in some of the cultures in Africa and India, for example, that the woman is ordainable. That would go a long way in advancing the role of women in their societies. The other point that was brought out by women from South America, I think Brazil, was that the problem is you do have women running parishes, but if the priest only comes around once a year and the couple want to get married, they'll go next door to the evangelicals and get married, and they're gone. So you can have lay people performing these ceremonies. You have to go through all sorts of hoops. Since 1992 in Alaska, I don't know the difference between Australia and Alaska. In Alaska, there has been rescripts so that lay people who are kind of permanently working in parishes could perform solemn baptisms and can witness marriages. And that began because, as you must understand, in Alaska, you have the wedding set, the people are there, and the priest can't land the plane. So, what are you going to do?
Right, right. You mentioned just the fact of ordination as being an uplifting thing. Maybe that could tie into a question I had. I love this quote from the Orthodox theologian John Zizioulas in your book about all church members are, quote, ordained by virtue of their baptism. What's the theological argument here if we say, well, women can be ordained to the diaconate, why could they not be ordained to the priesthood? Could you help us understand why it stops short?
Well, it's not even stopping short. These are two separate ministries. The deacon works for the priest, and the bishop and the priest. The deacon works for the bishop, and the priest works for the bishop. If you think of the progression, the lockstep progression of deacon, priest, bishop, you will never have women as deacons if you are so concerned that the unicity of order be maintained. The question of the ontological change, which is affected through ordination, is also affected through baptism and chrismation in the East or confirmation in the West. And so the argument against ordaining women as deacons, as priests, aside from the current documents, the opinion rendered in 1976 by the International Theological Commission and the commentary, the apostolic letter by John Paul II, and the ensuing commentary to Ordinatio Sacerdotalis by Joseph Ratzinger in 1995, argue basically that historically the feeling is that Jesus chose male apostles. Now that's what they say, and I don't go there. What I have said is that if you're going to hold the unicity of order, that is the argument that you cannot ordain a woman as a deacon because it has been affirmed that the church cannot ordain a woman as a priest, well, then the reverse is true, because out back, I have a truck with the liturgies that demonstrate that women have been sacramentally ordained as deacons. So, it pays your money, it takes your choice. But I don't make that argument. I don't think it's useful at this time. I know that gathering in Rome, there's going to be an ordination for Roman Catholic women priests. You have the Women's Ordination Conference around there. You also have discerning deacons going with a delegation of 55 people. There will be discussion about it. I think what is important to understand is that the church is becoming moribund in the areas that you suggested are the areas that are concerned about women, North America and Europe. And part of the reason is that women just are educated and they just kind of had it, and they're not. There was a movie, not going to take it anymore.
Right. Yeah, it seems like there's theological promise and promise for change around this idea of the universal priesthood and this idea of kind of a universal holy orders based on the universal priesthood. That came up in the Synod documents for me a lot, was returning to that. So maybe that's a good ground spiritually to start with. Maybe we can move now, Phyllis, and I want to be conscious of time. So if folks can want to start gathering questions, I know there's been a lot to digest here. I'm wondering if we could look at this idea in your book of the Catholic social teaching as a way. There it is, just church. I wish I had a digital copy, so I couldn't hold it up, but thank you for that. I'll read a quote from your introduction. The church structure seems disconnected from reality and from the gospel. The question presents itself: how can the church be just? How can the church exist justly within both the world and itself? How can the Catholic Church be one that espouses justice and be just? Does internal injustice mitigate any realistic means of speaking to the problems of the world? Very rich there. So you suggest the two main frameworks for analyzing this possibility of justice within the church. One was ecclesiology, which we've spoken of a lot here with the Synod, and the other is Catholic social teaching. Could you speak a bit about this idea of Catholic social teaching as a means of evaluating the church's internal injustice? I have more quotes I could give to you, but I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, well, it's funny, as you were talking and reading that quote, it came to mind sentence my mother used to say: street angel, house devil. And that the church outside will criticize the world. You look at Fratelli Tutti, you look at Laudato Si, and speak about the way individuals, including women, must be justly treated. But then inside, it does not treat its own people justly. And in the book, I do have not a lot of examples, but there are some. And you mentioned the Fordham lecture that I gave. There's one that sticks in my mind. You know, the Holy Father has made a lot about appointing women to positions, managerial positions in the Curia. But as you go down the wire diagram to some of the positions that women have been appointed to, including my own position on the Pontifical Commission for the Study of the Diaconate of Women, they're not remunerated. You don't get paid for this work. The secretary of the Pontifical Biblical Commission is not paid. She is a professor at the Gregoriana, but she has this huge position and she is not paid. Now, when I went over, I was offered, I think, 2 or 3 nights in the Holy Father's house, including meals and travel, and 150 euro for local needs. But that was it. Right. And any additional time I wanted to spend in Rome, including in the Holy Father's house, was on my own dime. And that happens a lot. I don't think the Synod members are being reimbursed for their time. And see, that's where the split comes, because the clerics who are there are still getting their salaries, whether they're in Rome or not.
Right.
I know that the Synod is paying for their housing, and their salaries are still coming. But it's a big deal it's a major consideration, particularly for married people, to go over there for 30 days and to be aside from away from their families, but not be paid. So the question of justice, even in my own parish, the full-time persons who are paid are male, and the part-time people are female. And there is usually a default to in church operations to have women being either voluntary employees or volunteers or part-time. And you know, if he wants to declericalize the laity, he better declericalize the church. You have to figure out a way to have lay people, male and female, properly remunerated for their services, because it just won't work.
It limits the representation of the universal church if it's only people that can afford to take that time, like you said,
right.
participate in these global events. I'd love now we're at 7:50, maybe open the floor if people would like to either type in the chat their question, or if you want to raise your, I'm on speaker view, so I can't always see everybody on one screen. So if you could use your electronic hand, possibly, if you have a question or comment. And as things are percolating for people, maybe I could ask Phyllis kind of a summing up question. I know, Phyllis, you've worked consistently on this issue for so many years. You've been through moments of hope, I'm sure, moments of disappointment, like this unfortunate comment earlier this summer from Pope Francis. But what's inspired you to stay on this issue, and how is it informed? I'm curious, just your own faith journey and understanding of your place in the church, and what would you say to us who can sometimes get discouraged, or how do we carry on?
Well, it's Mother Teresa used to say, you don't have to be successful, you only have to be faithful. I think that my contribution, whatever it may be, to the universal church is such as it is. If I am waiting for the Pope to make an announcement tomorrow, I think that's the wrong thing. I think my job is to continue the conversation, to have people think and pray about it. Maybe I'm not right. Maybe the church does not need women ordained to the diaconate. But I think it does. If one woman, such as Deaconess Angelique, is ordained somewhere in the Roman Catholic Church, to me, it's making a powerful statement against dowry burning, against wife beating, against menstruation huts, against all sorts of terrible things that are done to women inside and outside of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank you. Yeah, that's very powerful. We have a little clap here. Thank you for that. anyone with any thoughts or questions, follow-ups, or questions about the synod, where things are at now? Feel free to chime in. Actually, you can just unmute yourself and speak up if you'd like. Oh, Sarita, yes, good to see you.
Hi, Michael. How are you? I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, sounds good. Thank you.
I had some trouble with the computer. Miss Zagano, I just want to tell you that I've admired you for decades, and I want to thank you for all that you've done for the women of the church, and not just the Catholic Church, the Universal Church, the Orthodox, and the Apostolic Church. I've been a huge follower of yours. I've read many of your documents, articles, and books, and you give me great hope every time. And I have to say that I had hope. I've had hope for decades, but this past May was sort of a slap in the face, and I have taken a back seat in the dialogue and discussion. I belong to Discerning Deacons and Walk as well, and it was very disheartening, but your new texts and writings are rejuvenating hope for us again. I just want to thank you, because you are a pillar amongst us, and I'm thankful for you. God bless you.
Thank you. You're very sweet. Some people call me a thorn, so I'm happy to be a thorn. But yeah, I would encourage you to listen carefully to what the Holy Father said. He didn't say it couldn't happen. He said it wouldn't happen. And it's impossible for him to say it can't happen. And I think people need to hold on to that. It will happen when, they get their act together and take it on the road, but I got phone calls. I got 2 phone calls over the summer from 2 cardinals saying, we don't know what he's talking about. And how are you?
How are you?
Fine. If he said yes, I'd be out of business. But I think that we have to understand that we're dealing with an 87-year-old Italian Argentinian man. I've never seen him eat with a woman, ever. And I lived in the house for at one point 2 months at a stretch. And so I think we have to understand the mindset, and to cut him a little slack on that. And also, I think his Praetorian Guard around him is not particularly happy with the idea of ordained women.
I'm aware.
And I will be speaking in Cambridge in England, I think the 15th of November. And my colleague Bernard Poitier will be speaking. He's a psychologist. And we've asked him to, as well as a theologian, and we've asked him to answer the question, what is the problem with ordaining women? What is the emotional problem, the psychological problem that clerics have with ordained women?
Thank you, sir.
I saw somebody else, Grace's way.
Yes, Grace. I was just
I have a question. Am I correct in saying that Jesus was born, lived, and died a Jew?
Yeah.
Okay. If that is true, then why does the Catholic Church say that the Seder was the Last Supper and the first priests were ordained? If it were truly a Seder, there would have been women and children there too. And would Jesus have said, only those of you who are around the table who image me physically can say these words?
Well, first of all,
I don't believe that was the first Mass nor the first ordination of men.
The church does not say that anyone got ordained at the Last Supper. That's an interpretation. And I have heard it. I was at the seminary here in Yonkers with some first-year men who said that Jesus ordained the first priest at the Last Supper. And I said, where did you hear that? And they said, well, have you ever heard of Fulton Sheen? Because they showed us a movie of Fulton, So, I mean, there's that attitude out there. In terms of a Seder, I have been to Seders.
I have too.
Only the men bless the bread and the wine at the Seder. So there's that. So whether there are women there or not, it's only the man who blesses the wine at the Seder. So I think that those kinds of discussions, you're dealing with a lot of ignorance there, and it doesn't go very far. But thank you for your question.
Yeah, because I know our 46-year-old pastor, fresh out of the seminary, basically, is, swears that was the first ordination of men. And
Well, wrong.
Thank you, Grace, for your question.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. We had a nice comment from Ellen in the chat. When I get upset about sexual violence across the world, your work and words provide some solace, Dr. Zagano. So thank you for that, Ellen. Any other questions for percolating here? It was a very rich discussion, a lot of history kind of took us through to our current moment.
I'm interested in the question of the ontological change. Do we think it really exists? Because having been there and done that, I'm wondering what's my status now.
Yeah, well, that's actually different because the Catholic Church, in terms of ordination, is once it happens, you're stuck. That's it. Even if you resign your priesthood, you're still a priest. The Orthodox don't take it that way, but the ontological change means one is configured to Christ, and that happens in baptism. It happens in confirmation, and it happens in orders. So I don't think there's any kind of as I said earlier, if you can't be ordained, you can't be baptized. But I wouldn't. Richard Rick Gallardes has some commentary about that, and it's actually mentioned in this book that Michael is talking about here. Anyway, I got to tell you about another book. This is What's a Deacon, and it's written by a friend of mine, Sister Irene Kelly, and it's for children. It's from Clear Faith Publishing, and you can order it online. But there's also floating around the internet a 4-page or a 4-section bulletin insert thing that you can use with pages from What's a Deacon for coloring pages for the children, because I think we're in this for the long haul. And I think it's important to tell children about this as well. We have a thing. My mother was a battered wife. She and I both suffered. I just lost it.
Both suffered physical and emotional abuse. And Jane, I see your hand. We'll get to you in one moment. It is my firm belief that the church needs to ordain and invest women.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Martisa, thank you. And we will note that book that Phyllis just held up in our, someone had asked about resources. When we do the recording in the events page, we always put resources, so we'll link to that as well.
Yeah, and I'll try and talk to the people who have those bulletin inserts, and maybe we can link them to your pages as well. Great, great. Jane, please.
Thank you so much, Ms. Zagano, for all of your work. My mother was an assistant editor at Paulus Press for many years, and I have many, many texts, ecumenical too, about women deacons, women priests, etc. So I have a library, thank God. I am a member of Discerning Deacons, and I stay with this issue because though I'm getting older, whether or not this happens in my lifetime, I think it's important to be present for younger women. We had recently a celebration of St. Phoebe in my parish that I organized and invited a Dominican sister to preach at 2 of our masses, and she did break open the word. And we had a Q&A and a lecture another night on women, the unheard women in Scripture. So I think I stay because I think it's important that younger women see that. And when women come to Mass of all ages and they want to hear the word, they want to see a woman preaching, recognized in all the ministerial fullness of the role. So they want to see that. So I hang in there because I think that is part of mine to do. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate.
Well, I appreciate it. And I'm guessing that you gave Gina Scarangella a hearing at your parish, and that's a good thing.
Yes.
And to encourage all of you to do the same thing, to invite women preachers to celebrate St. Phoebe. I don't really know. I follow discerning deacons, but not as well as members of discerning deacons. So if you can go to their website and find out what they're doing, St. Phoebe's celebration, or the feast, as I said earlier, is the 3rd of September. It is so celebrated by the Orthodox. And I've seen St. Phoebe masses with blue vestments, Orthodox masses that go on forever. They're wonderful. But to just keep it up, and to keep up the pressure is not the word. Keep
presence,
up
maybe presence. Keep up the presence. Show up.
And the interest, just showing up and talking to people. And if these men, if the priest, the 46-year-old pastor that you have is intimidated, well, try to deal with him. Because as I said earlier, Poitier and I will be in Cambridge, Massachusetts, talking about Cambridge, England, at Cambridge University, talking about it. And Poitier's point will be, what is the emotional problem that clerics have with ordained women? And I think that's a very serious discussion that needs to be, and it redounds to the question of formation and selection of candidates. And I think when the Holy Father talks about declericalizing, he's talking about the kind of narcissistic, self-involved, very weak individuals who find their only power, almost as sociopaths, in the priesthood. And that's what he doesn't want. And that's not to say the priests, that automatically a priest is like that, but there are too many like that. And I think it's up to us to call them out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jane, for that insight. We might have time for one or two more. I see one in the chat here from Cynthia. Phyllis, do you think there's some global flow today toward the feminine sacred? I read that question. I think right away of Laudato Si, and kind of the idea of the feminine sacred in the earth, and some of Elizabeth Johnson's work. Any comment on the relationship of the feminine sacred in this movement?
It's not my field, but I think the recognition of women being holy is important, and women not being dirty. I mean, I'll tell you that in 1967, there was a document from the Second Vatican Council called Musicum Sacrum, which is still in effect, which says that if a choir is mixed and includes women, it cannot sing from within the sanctuary. And that's still on the books. And the point being, you don't want those dirty females near the sacred. The Greek tradition, it doesn't have this problem with women. Okay. So I think that, in terms of recognizing women as fully human, is the effort that we're trying to get to here.
Right, part and parcel of that movement. Well, this has been really insightful and illuminating for all of us, Phyllis. And I can't thank you enough for taking some time to walk us through all these issues. And again, the book is Just Faith.
Just Church,
out from Paulus Press. And we will link to that with the correct title. Exactly. Thank you. You've increased my faith, so that's why I was on the tip of my tongue. But we'll put that out and have the recording up soon, hopefully by Monday. And feel free to check our website. And I always send out the recording to everybody that was on our registration list.
Thank you.
There are a few more comments trickling through, but I can I guess save those for I struggle with a church that claims to revere Mary. It doesn't want women, especially mothers, to have a voice within the sanctuary. To that last comment, and the Vatican may not want the Synod to be hijacked, but this will happen anyway. So thank you, and thank you for inspiring us. Lots of inspiration, good movement forward. Yes.
Let me say one thing. I'm not allowed to post the theological studies article on my website, and neither can you for copyright reasons, but it can be shared. So if that I don't know why. I'm allowed to share it with people, but I can't post it. So, and there should be an article soon in the National Catholic Reporter about the article. So, and I appreciate whatever you can do, Michael. And as I said, I'm going to try and write it it's 8,000 words. I mean, it'll put you to sleep anyway, but I'm going to try and write a précis of it for normal human beings, and maybe put it in the tablet or someplace. I don't know where. Tablet in England.
Well, we'll be on the lookout for that, and we'll keep following work at NCR and everywhere else. So thank you again, and thanks to everyone who joined us this evening.
Okay.
All right.